Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Yes Corner number 10. Every 2 weeks, we speak to organisations who are there as a great resource for the Yes movement. And this week, we are speaking to one of my favourite resources and one of my favourite people from one of those resources, Dr Craig Dazell from Common Weal.
Hello.
Hello, Craig. How are you doing?
I'm doing
very
good.
well. I'm very well. Nice to see you. How's things in Scotland at the moment?
In Scotland as a whole, or in my little patch of it?
In Scotland as a whole.
Let's just say it's keeping me busy.
Yeah, very interesting times. Well, the first question I've got for you, while we're waiting for questions to come in from our audience, is just really if you could tell me a little bit more about the kind of background to Common Weal, how long it started and what the objectives of the organisation were. That'd be a brilliant place to start.
Sure. So Common Weal came out of the 2014 independence campaign. I actually started before that, started in 2012, 2013 as a project within another think tank in Scotland, the Jimmy Reid Foundation. The JRF held itself as a neutral party within the independence debate, and it still does. But the Common Weal group within that was a way of trying to have a bit more of a pro-independence discussion within there. And it was actually how I kind of got involved in politics in an indirect way, because it was my first ever political meeting. Before 2012, I was the guy in the pub who said, "Let's not talk politics." And my friends still joke about that. My first political thing was turning up to a local Yes group meeting to find out what this thing was all about. And I was confronted with an extremely hyperactive Robin McAlpine talking about all this weird stuff, and I didn't have a clue what he was going on about. Almost put me off, I have to say. But I went back to the second meeting and he spoke again, and I was a bit more able to listen to him at that point. And he was talking about this new project, Common Weal, and what it was going to do and how it was going to create this fabulous new Scotland on this all of us first kind of track. And it got me interested. It got me thinking not just independence is a nice thing for Scotland. It got me interested in this is the kind of Scotland I want to see. Common Weal is how to do it. Independence is a necessary step. Fast forward a little. 2014, the referendum came. Common Weal spun out from the Jimmy Reid Foundation as its own think tank just after the referendum, and again, I was kind of there in the Arches in Glasgow, listening to that announcement, and again, still very interested in this Common Weal thing as a citizen and activist. But it spun out from there, started to gather donations, started to become a funded and going concern, and it's just kind of grown ever since.
So it's getting towards, it's kind of close to its 10-year anniversary then?
Very nearly, yes. Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about the how it started in terms of the funding. Is it funded the same, or is the way that the Common Weal's funded changed over that period of time?
No, it's remained the same throughout. Common Weal is funded entirely from just ordinary folk giving small, regular donations. That's the mainstay of our funding. The average donation is about £10 a month. We have a few people who give on the order of £100 a month or more, but not many. The vast bulk of people give us a very small donation. We do get single donations in, and we also get revenue from things like book sales and t-shirt sales. We'll be relaunching our shop very soon, so keep an eye out for that.
That's it. And posters. I've got a couple of your posters.
Yes.
And a big book, and like a map of Scotland, I think.
Oh,
so, yeah, I think the merchandise is probably quite important for you, I'd imagine, because there's not a lot of really good quality stuff within that space. I know Stuart Bremner does a few things, and there's some good other stuff going around, but the merchandising, I think, is always such good quality of the stuff that you do.
Yeah, I mean, things like a poster or a good book that tells a story of this is what Scotland could be is a very core part of our mission. Is really what it's a much better way to get to more people than simply reading a vast library of policy papers.
Absolutely. So that kind of leads on to the impact of what you do, not just the quality merchandising and stuff like that, but more into the kind of policy papers. So looking back over the last, since the referendum, what impact has Common Weal had? Kind of measurable impact?
Well, let's go back to my involvement in the story. I joined the organisation formally in 2016. As I say, I was just a supporter and an activist and campaigner before then. In 2016, I wrote a blog, an article in my blog that kind of went a bit viral. It was talking about GERS and the finances of Scotland. It kind of went a bit viral. It got noticed, and I got a call from Robin, saying that they were working on a project that could use a bit of maths in it, and thought I might be someone who could do it. That turned into my first ever political paper, which was the economics of shale gas extraction, fracking, which then played a part in a broader campaign on fracking in Scotland, which led to the now ban on fracking in Scotland. So there's, right out from my first policy.
Trace it right back.
That's been a tangible impact. But we've had other stuff. Our biggest success to date has been winning the case for a Scottish National Investment Bank, the SNIB. That goes back to papers that we wrote in 2016 and in 2017. Turned into a long-term, long-grinding campaign that was initially flatly rejected by the Scottish Government. But as that campaign built in strength, the case was made, the campaign was won, and we now have a National Investment Bank in Scotland. We've also had similar campaigns winning, at least on the policy level, at least as political parties like the SNP and the Green adopting policies to form things like a public energy company, a national energy development agency, a national infrastructure company. So that's something that made it into the SNP manifesto at the recent election. We have a Scottish statistics agency as a policy in the SNP books as well. Now, these aren't quite as far advanced as the SNIB. We're still waiting for them to get picked up by the Scottish Government. We're still waiting for them to turn into tangible things. But that's, half a dozen major campaigns that our wee think tank has, if they are implemented, will tangibly change this country.
Fantastic. Who is your target market? Because you've just said that you've had success getting to the Scottish Government, but what about the kind of wider movement, no voters, and also the UK government? How does that fit in when you're thinking about the papers and the policies to address?
It's fair to say that we don't have much influence at the UK government level. They are not particularly interested in much that goes on up here. Certainly not anything that's being promoted from here. But our best campaigns have been multi-pronged. They have been taking policies to the Scottish Government and saying, we think this is a good idea, taking them to the civil servants who would be in charge of implementing the policy and asking them, is this possible to do, and finding ways to help them make it possible to do. And then going to the wider movement that is, can be the pro-independence movement, but it can be a broader coalition as well, because not everything we do is directly related to independence. In fact, about half of our work isn't. It's about what Scotland can do and as part of a devolved country. Building those coalitions that then builds the political pressure. So you have a government that has the policy in front of them. You have people behind the scenes saying this is how you would do it, and then you have a movement saying we want this. That's how you make things happen. And
in terms of that target market of the media in London, because what we often see is a poorly put together paper from someone who's maybe slightly leaning towards unionist or the right hand side or the right of the political spectrum tends to get picked up in a lot of mainstream press. But the stuff that you're putting out, would you agree, doesn't seem to garner that a similar amount of coverage? Is there any way that we can kind of help as a movement support the work that you do to try and get more coverage across the UK as a whole?
It is very difficult to get into the media, and it's getting more difficult by the day. Long gone are the days where a newspaper would have a dedicated correspondent on a particular field and could be expected to understand that field in detail. And would be able to understand a policy paper if you took it to them. Now things are a bit more generalist. Journalists are kind of rushed off. It's difficult to get that attention, especially broadcast media. Broadcast media is something that we struggle a lot to get into. I've been on the BBC Scotland Radio a handful of times over the last several years, and not at all in the last couple of years, for instance. And TV is harder again. So getting out into the media is difficult. Getting out to people, that's a lot easier. Common Weal is fairly unique in the think tank world in that we have our groups of local activists embedded in communities who are really good at picking up our papers and just simply talking to their friends and families about them and talking to their communities about them. And that serves us well in building a bit of hype around these policies and helping us start to lobby politicians directly, because politicians do have a responsibility to listen to their constituents. So if we can find someone who is a constituent of an area where there's a politician who has an interest in one of our papers, that's often a really good way of getting some attention drawn to it.
No, that's really interesting. And what I can pick up from there is that, and this is something I see across the movement as a whole, is that if we actually start doing stuff that's at the same time as the other organisations, so for example, the next policy paper that you're on is, what's the next policy paper that you're about to put out?
Wait and see. Well, we have been doing a lot of work on helping to build a national care service. For instance, now that was actually our last policy paper. We were looking at how this would be embedded in communities and community hubs. Our next paper will be taking a slightly different angle in that. We're not quite ready to say what that is, but that'll be out soon. That'll be building up towards a much larger paper, which simply presents an entire blueprint of a national care service that would serve the country with as much care and attention and pride as the National Health Service does.
Great. This is a brilliant example, Craig, because I think that the movement as a whole could support something like this. But, if you just kind of reveal it to people and go, ta-da, then it's really difficult for us to have kind of campaigned behind it and put everything in place. And, I'm certainly seeing that we're not having as much of an impact when we're all working on separate things. And something we're going to announce on Wednesday is we're actually thinking about a week of trying to get all the organisations together to work on something, because we think that's going to have much more impact. And I'll tell you what that is on Wednesday, but with enough notice for us all to work together. So have you got any examples of kind of working together with the movement? Because as I said, that's something that we really like to try and highlight.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, I'm quite frequently speaking to various local activist groups, be they our Common Weal local groups, yes groups. There's still quite a lot of yes hubs around the country. And even political party branch meetings are somewhere I often frequent as well. Things have been in many ways a little bit harder because of the pandemic. In some ways a little bit easier, because it's now easier for me to, for instance, appear over a video link to somewhere up in the Highlands than it would have been for me to drive up there, for instance. But we also work with other organisations around Scotland. So we have very close links with other think tanks in the country. We have close links with groups like the RSA, the Royal Society for the Arts. We've had other avenues of campaigning. Like, for instance, very recently I took part in presenting evidence to the Scottish Climate Assembly, which was a very fun experience. It was really interesting, just listening to the views of the ordinary non-political folk out with the bubble, and seeing how their report came together. It was published last week. There's a lot of very exciting proposals in there. Highly encourage people to check that out and read it.
Okay, great. And so some good examples here of kind of working together. I know you did you spoke on a couple of sessions for the Sustainable Growth Commission event that we did for Independence Live a few months ago. It probably seems like a long time ago, and so much has happened from there. I just wanted to, I don't want to concentrate too much on the politics tonight, because this is about trying to find Common Weal as a resource. But because I've got the opportunity to ask about the Sustainable Growth Commission, I will. What's your thoughts of that, and have they changed over the last 6 months? And my final question on that is, do you think that the impact of the Sustainable Growth Commission report is receding within the party, or do you still think it's quite important?
My thoughts on that report are pretty much the same as they have been since 2018, when I was up at 3 a.m. reading the paragraph in it that said that they would cede the entire Scottish foreign aid budget to the rest of the UK to spend as it will. My review of that report is not glowing. I've written multiple policy papers attacking aspects of it, and I've spoken at various groups, including including events organised by Indie Live against the Growth Commission report. I do wonder if if we hadn't been as strongly against that right out of the bat, I wonder if that report would have been challenged in the way it has been at all. We are now seeing hints of it being sort of pushed to the side as well. In this new post-pandemic world, we might need to think of something else, but I still have my suspicions there. We'll wait and see what that something else actually is, and we'll be there to analyse and critique it where necessary.
It does seem very sticky for a report. It really does just seem to be kind of like hanging around, despite the fact that it's clearly written at a time that doesn't have obviously any impact or bearing on what's happened with COVID. It does just look a little bit peculiar to still be sat there. But that report's my bugbear. I feel the same, and every time an SNP MP mentions the foreign aid and how terrible the United Kingdom is, I just like to give a little reminder that says that, well, we are planning to give our budget over to them to decide. It doesn't really sound like a good idea. Do you support the Sustainable Growth Commission report? It's a nice little in there. Thinking a little bit more about Common Weal as an organisation, can you tell us a little bit more about the team and the other types of things that they do?
Well, it's a very small team. On the policy side of things, there is, well, I'm the head of policy. We have had in the past more junior policy officers under what would be my position, although we don't at the moment. We have quite a good system of volunteers who help us out with various policies, and we have a couple of working groups made up of experts from all over Scotland, linked together in a specific theme. So we have an energy working group looking at how we decarbonise our energy and improve it and make Scotland ready for the Green New Deal. And we have a care reform working group who are doing all the things that I mentioned just a wee moment ago on a national care service. We have other folk behind the scenes as well. So we've got folk who do the admin of the org, and as with every company, these are the people who, if they don't turn up for work today, nothing gets done. And we have folk who do a bit more of the campaigning, who prepare videos and graphics, and who talk to the media to try and get our stuff noticed in there. But it's a small team. There's only single digits of us. We also had a media team ourselves, Source, formerly Common Space, which had a small team of journalists as well. Sadly, it is now shutting down. So they'll be going, I'm afraid. But hopefully that will allow us to reinvest some of those resources into more of the policy, into more of the campaigning as well.
Yeah, it's amazing what these organisations manage to do with the kind of small amount of indie pounds that they get from from the movement. It really is just trying to punch with as much weight as we can, considering the small finances that we have. Thinking out to the movement, Craig, is there anything that we can do to help Common Weal? And obviously the funding is one thing that that people could look at to support, but how do we make the most, and how do we amplify the amazing work that you do?
Yeah, obviously the funding, again, without funding nothing happens. So if you are in a position to help support Common Weal, absolutely, I'd encourage folk to do so. Beyond that, get involved. Find your local Common Weal group and get involved with them. Find policy papers that you're interested in, and or other resources or books. For example, our book on how to create a Green New Deal in Scotland, the Common Home Plan, or our book on how to create an independent Scotland, how to start a new country, and really talk to your friends and family about them, and talk to your politicians about them as well.
And in terms of as a resource, I think you'd encourage people to get onto the website, have a look around, share everything that's happening. Because one thing I think is as a movement, we're really good at sharing what's new. And it is that kind of echo chamber, but I don't think many of the movement go back onto some brilliant resources and think, hey, this is still really important, let's get out and let's share that. I take it there's a lot of resources on the Common Weal website that would be brilliant for people to still share.
I mean, our policy library has about 150 policy papers in them, each one of them worthy of a campaign in its own right. I understand that not everybody really wants to dive into multi-page reports on technical details about how to set up a central bank and things like that. Policy nerds like me love it, but it's not for everyone. I do recognise that. We also have the Common Weal Policy podcast. Goes out every Wednesday and is helpfully mirrored on a Friday by Indie Live. So thank you for that. Indie Live Radio puts that out. They are a good way of just spending half an hour talking about a policy or talking about the political landscape in Scotland as it's happening and commenting on it. So I find that they are often viewed as something that's a bit more accessible. And a bit more easily shared to folk. So, and we're also going to be working on providing shorter briefings and infographics that can help promote our work out even further.
Fantastic. And looking ahead, how do you decide what you're going to cover? I mean, I just kind of imagine you all kind of getting together and it's a bit like when I used to advise some startups. There's never a shortage of ideas of what to do with a product to make it better. I doubt there's ever a shortage of things to cover. So how do you decide what it is that you're going to put all that effort into?
We have regular strategy meetings with really the whole team, and we try and work out where Scotland is lacking policy and try and fill that gap and try and fill it in a gap that is Common Weal flavoured. We do taste the air. We do see, for example, again, the growing movement behind a national care service, but also the risk that we could end up with something that is branded as a national care service but doesn't actually function as one in actuality. So what we then do is work out, well, if we were to design such a care service and it was to meet the criteria that we think a care service should meet if it's going to be worthy of the name, this is what it's going to look like. But sometimes, I mean, best laid plans and all, sometimes we will build up for a long-term project and something like the Growth Commission comes out and we will throw away what we were planning to do that summer, and we will respond to this thing that has landed there. Similar with the pandemic. When that hit last year, what we did was started to comment on the immediate policies that were being implemented to respond to the pandemic, but we also started very quickly looking at, well, what do we need to do to get out of the pandemic in a way that actually does get us to a better place? So we took our previous work, like the Common Home Plan, our Green New Deal plan, but also plans around building up an independent country and our Common Weal industrial policies and economic policies, and we kind of syncretized them all together into something that we called Resilient Scotland. So we couldn't have predicted something like the pandemic happening, but once it happened, that allowed us, we were able to re-gear ourselves to respond to it. And this is something that I think has been very directly linked to the way Common Weal is funded compared to some other think tanks. Our supporters love what we do and are very appreciative of the fact that we can shift gears and move into something completely different when the need arises. We're not the kind of organisation that has to go looking for some funding grant, and as a consequence of that grant, we now need to produce a policy paper on this specific topic on this specific timetable.
That's interesting. How long could we speak about talking about the funding of other think tanks? That would be 30 minutes for sure. I've got a really good question here. I'll just put up on the screen from David. Can you read that, Craig?
Yes, I can see it there. So in light of the pandemic and the potential for this British Tory government rolling back devolution, do you feel an added urgency to doing what you need to do and a need to refocus priorities? In a sense, yes. In a sense, not quite, because we also have the climate emergency that is looming, and the deadlines of that are pretty fixed and coming ever closer towards us. We were told in 2018 that we had 12 years left to make serious inroads into our decarbonisation strategy, and we have missed our climate targets every year since. And as we saw last week when the IPCC's latest report was leaked, the consequences of the world missing its targets mean that everything is going to get harder. So there is added urgency, but it's not just the British government and their attacks on devolution that are causing it.
Okay, great. Thanks for that question, David. A percentage answer to this question, please. If there was an independence referendum September next year, how prepared do you think the Scottish Government is to move to an independent Scotland? So from 0 being not in the slightest to 100 being completely prepared. What's your feeling on that?
I don't think they're prepared at all. I think the work that was very, very briefly started just before the pandemic, and it was then halted ostensibly because of the pandemic, that work is essentially zero. And we've seen in recent weeks some of the lack of planning in the independence unit coming to light. I mean, plans are there, and I'm not just talking about the stuff that Common Weal has produced on how to start a new country and whatnot. So, blueprints are there ready to be picked up and run with. But I'm not yet convinced that the Scottish Government is ready to pick them up.
I looked into, we did a topic on defence of Scotland last week. We had a half-day conference on it, and I started looking into it, and the more you kind of looked into it, the more that had to be done. Yeah. And just from the whole, you can't really imagine, where do we train our officers? What happens at the moment? They all trained in England. Oh, okay, that's interesting. There was just like a can of worms really round every corner. And when I was looking at that, I was thinking, I don't know if there's any other resource that we can put into play apart from hundreds of civil servants who can design this stuff. It's so much to prepare the groundwork for a new state. Really, with all of the work that you're doing and all of the movement are doing, really, is it any substitute at all for a government who have a resourced 100-person civil service unit going at this for a long period of time?
Well, the work that a Scottish Government civil service can do can be very limited because they're trammelled by the limits of devolution, of course. But what the Scottish Government could do is set up external groups, perhaps start a national commission is the big idea in our proposal, how to start a new country. A national commission that would be empowered to then find the people who can answer these questions. There are plenty of people around Scotland who have done this work or have done aspects of this work. There are plenty of people across Europe, across the world, who have done this work. You want to know how to set up a central bank? Find a group of central bankers and hire them for a few days to sit in a room and tell you.
And where does that revenue come? Where does that money come from? I mean, is that Scottish Government money that has to be found out of the Scottish Government budget?
It possibly could be, or you could look at other sources of funding. I mean, there are other ways to fund national commissions.
But yeah, it's certainly funding for anything that's independence, pointing towards independence, does seem to be difficult. And obviously, in no way was that. I know there's a huge amount of work going on in the transition papers, which we covered in the defence event, and everything that's going on in climate and banking. And there's so many people working away. And to re-emphasise my point, that's why I think it's so important that we're all working together, so we kind of maximise the effort that we've that we're all putting in. Final thoughts, Craig, on the next few months and where we're going to be kind of towards Christmas, with our recovery and moving out from the pandemic?
Very difficult to say because we're currently in another upswing of cases of COVID. The vaccine rollout is proceeding, and that seems to be having an effect on the number of people who are hospitalised and who are dying, although those numbers are rising as well. It's a very uncertain time for the next several weeks. I don't know where we're going to be, to be honest. All I can do is keep doing what I'm doing here and produce more papers for when people are ready to read them. Yeah. Well,
and we're really pleased that you're able to do that. In Barcelona, where I am, we were on Saturday. We were told that we didn't have to wear face masks outside. And that's been almost a year where it's been compulsory to wear face masks as soon as you left the house. So it was actually quite nice to go out, and it felt like we were making progress, but numbers are rising a little bit here as well. So who knows where we'll be in September. Thanks very much, Craig. I really appreciate your time, and thanks so much. Bye for now.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I know where we won't be in 2 weeks' time. We were scheduled to have another Yes Corner every 2 weeks, but we're actually delaying that for every 3 weeks because we're running something a little bit broader and bigger across all of the independence indie live channels and hopefully across movement. So no show in a couple of weeks, but we'll have one the week later. But thanks to everyone who's tuned in, and I hope that was really informative about the great work that Craig does at Common Weal. Thanks so much. Bye for now.